Hey everyone, welcome to another LinkedIn Live. This is Cooking with Teams. We are going to Kansas City, Missouri, moving our son there this weekend. So I'm coming live to you from the moving van, and I am traveling on Route 80. And what occurred to me as I was driving on 80 through Iowa was this is the largest Microsoft data center region in the US. They've made an announcement probably 2 years ago that there's more investment in the Microsoft data center in Iowa than anywhere else in the US. And I don't believe that has changed. So it's going to be a massive campus. And a lot of people wonder, why is Microsoft investing out in Iowa? There's a couple reasons. One would be the cost of power, the cost of land, and when you find interstate or railway, east-west or north-south in the US, that is also where you have fiber, networking, fast, cheap, and available, and right of way, right? You can put cables or even upgrade cables and networking when you find interstates because they already run through east, west, north, south. These are perfect places to place data centers. So if you've ever wondered where Microsoft data centers are, think about interstate. In the Chicagoland area, same place you'd find it. Where the interstate is, you're going to look for buildings that might have lots of power, might have physical security, but what you're not going to find is any type of marking from a standpoint of, here's the Microsoft data center, welcome. And so the physical locations of the data centers, wherever Microsoft has the capability, are kept secret, are kept off of the beaten path. You're not going to find Microsoft marketing. So if you see the Microsoft building off of Route 88 right out of Chicago, that's a Microsoft branch office, not the data center. Same thing in Chicago, downtown Chicago, Microsoft's branch office would have markings and would be very easy for you to find. The data centers, however, much more kept behind the scenes from a standpoint of the physical location. So you might be wondering what's been up. Our son, Sam, who just graduated with a culinary arts degree, is moving to Kansas to a downtown Kansas City. And I apologize if the sound on this is horrible. I have no idea of how bad it's going to be, but I figured I've got probably 5 to 6 hours of a captive audience and no one to talk to because we're taking 3 cars down there. So we're caravanning to Kansas City. I've heard of RAGBRAI. I don't know how many of you have done the Across Iowa bike drive or bike path. RAGBRAI this year and I believe last year were virtual, so they weren't physical here in Iowa, but they were join and do the miles wherever you find yourself as opposed to traveling to Iowa. But that is a ride we have never done, the RAGBRAI Across Iowa. What else? Lots of great places to call home from a college perspective in Iowa. Sam just let me know that 80 goes through Kansas City. I assumed we had a turn to get to Kansas City, Missouri, but he said we're basically on 80 the whole way. Kansas City would be another place where I have a number of Microsoft contacts. So if anybody watching is from Kansas City, feel free to make a comment or let me know and Sam, our son, know where you would suggest eating. Barbecue is obviously something Kansas City is well known for, and I have in my travels hit a few of the barbecue places. I've been to Jack Stacks, I've been to Gates Barbecue, I also went to Plowboys, and I think there's at least one other that Bob Wrench suggested to me, and I believe that was Q39, if memory serves. Q something, and a barbecue place in Kansas City, Missouri. Just got a notification that our ring went off at home. That's either the person that is staying or somebody driving by our neighborhood. We've got one dog and 3 cats. So the 3 cats, perfectly fine to leave. The dog we had to make a decision about. Is somebody going to stay with the dog and dog sit? Or are we going to bring the dog for a 6 or 7 hour drive? And our dog Stella doesn't deal with being in the car very well. We did recently get her some shoes that help with just calming her down. And so there may be a trip to Kansas City in the future with our dog, but for this trip at least, we left the dog at home. Sam mentioned that once we get to Des Moines, Iowa, the interstate opens up to 4 or 5 lanes, I think he said. So that's probably in 2 hours that we'll have a much wider roadway for traveling. But right now we're still on the 2 lane. And we've just crossed into Iowa probably in the last, 30 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes. I hope everybody else is having a wonderful Saturday. Jason, I hope to see you once we get to Kansas City. And if anybody is in Kansas City and would like to earn some Microsoft swag as well as some cold hard cash, would love you to consider meeting us or reaching out. We're going to be moving Sam into the 500 block of Prospect Avenue. I am not familiar with Kansas City to talk about whether that's in a particular neighborhood or area, but Jason did tell me he is familiar with the area and gave me some suggestions of what to do and potentially what not to do this weekend. Jason Carl and I met many years ago. Jason is a Presbyterian minister in Overland Park, Kansas, and Jason Carl and I roomed together at the Presbyterian Youth Triennium, not Microsoft, something totally different, church related. And the Presbyterian Youth Triennium started in the 1980s and has always been held in Indiana. The very first time it was held at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. And from the second 3 years, it's every 3 years, triennium, the name, hence the name. From the second triennium that I attended, it's always been at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. And I went to that very first triennium in Purdue in West Lafayette, Indiana, as a high school freshman. And from that experience, which was a week with an international group of high school students, youth, it transformed my experience of what church could mean and be. And the reasons for that were that it was high energy, it was something put on by the youth as opposed to adults, and it spoke to me about what the worship experience could be. What worshiping with thousands of kids my age would look like, as opposed to the youth group in my high school. We might have had 15 to 20 kids total, and then for events, maybe 10 to 15 of them. Sometimes we would invite friends, so we might max out at 20 people at an event. But between youth retreats in high school and the Triennium in West Lafayette, Indiana, those were transformative experiences for me as a youth. So when Jason and I were talking about doing small group leadership and chose each other as the roommate situation, one thing that occurred to me was, hey, I've got a son who at the time was 8 or 9. And so as a small group leader, I called in some favors and some requests to bring my son with on that Presbyterian Youth Triennium experience. And if there's one thing that Sam would probably remember, it is that experience of worshiping totally different than our church growing up. I have the fortune of having grown up in a church in DeKalb, Illinois, and having both of my kids at least experience some of their church experience in that setting. And to call it a different experience would be putting it mildly. At Triennium, you're with 5,000 other Presbyterians. You're in a large auditorium. They are passing around beach balls and playing rock music. The only rock music that was played in my church growing up was in the parking lot when my parents let me start the car before we left. There was never rock music in our church. And so experiencing that within the context of the actual worship experience was something I didn't even know existed. And then the actual services were still based on the Presbyterian style of putting together a service, but man, were they totally different. You had a sermon or a message that was delivered by people that had interest in putting together something that would be familiar and speak to youth. Within the 80s, that was whatever was popular at the time and whatever issues the actual committee that put together the Triennium decided to tackle. What I hadn't either realized or taken the time to put together in my head was that 2 or 3 of the people within our youth group actually put together or were involved with that 1983 Triennium experience. So that was pretty cool. I went as a high schooler, and in West Lafayette, Indiana in July, it's pretty darn hot. What I didn't realize, but realized later, was if you go back to Presbyterian Youth Triennium as a college student, I think you get the same kind of dorm experience that you get as an attendee in high school. However, if you go as a small group leader, you get the cream of the on-campus rooms, and you have air conditioning, you have a separate place to eat with other small group leaders, so you meet other adults that are either pastors, they're involved with the youth group at their churches, or you just get to meet other people that signed up as a small group leader. And to talk about the number of connections, that's where I met Jason, was preparing for the Presbyterian Youth Triennium. And then Jason made me aware of all sorts of other people that have stayed in my Facebook connections, like Paula. Paula was somebody I met, I think, when Sam was in high school. And she was another small group leader. and Presbyterian minister. And those are people that I can still reach out to or find on Facebook. Our associate pastor, at the time of at least the maybe first and second training that I attended as an adult, Karen, is now in Indianapolis, Indiana, with her 2 kids. So close enough to West Lafayette, Indiana, to still be involved and probably drive, maybe even drive home. But between Karen, Jason, and Paula, those are 3 people that as an adult really changed my perspective of what church could be. And so hopefully this evening I'll see Jason. Hopefully there won't be too much moving of furniture, either left or required. We are going to look into either finding some volunteers or some willing participants. If that happens, great. If it doesn't, we will be moving Sam ourselves into his apartment. He told us that there isn't an elevator and that he doesn't know what floor his apartment is on. These would be things that I probably would have called or confirmed. He did walk around the apartment building that he's moving into. And he did say that there are stairs on the outside. So instead of having to take everything inside and then potentially do staircases indoors, we have an outdoor staircase at our disposal. I hope everybody else has a better Sabbath than I may have. Be sweaty and this. Welcome to Iowa, everyone. I'll try to touch base with you at some point, maybe on the way home.